you know that about 80% of our face washes, face scrubs, lotions, soaps, toothpaste all contain plastic in form typically of microplastic? Hi, my name is Dr. Ollie, and today I want to talk to you about the very, very important topic, which is microplastic. Microplastic was introduced in the 70s, and it's now everywhere, starting with our personal care products, with cleaning products, paint, just name it. And of course, it makes it into the waterways, so it's going to end up in our rivers, in our lakes, and in the oceans. And through contaminating our fields and contaminating our waterways, it makes its way into our food chain. So be not astonished if you're going to learn today that you're eating everyday plastic in form of microplastic and nanoplastic. So let's start with the definition of microplastic. Microplastic pieces are defined as being plastic pieces smaller than 5 millimeters. Microbeads are plastic pieces smaller than 1 millimeter. And nanoplastic, of course, is plastic in the size of nanometers. And I just told you, microplastic is everywhere. It's added to personal care product to add volume. Just imagine that. So that someone can sell you more product, they're adding plastic into it, into your lotion, into your toothpaste. And you absorb all that by using it. How crazy is that? What are we doing to ourselves? Now, when you look at global production of plastic has reached 400 to 500 million tons per year. And when you take the cumulative amount, I'm going to show you a slide for that. Here it is. And you see that the cumulative amount in the last 30, 40 years is reaching now 8 billion, with a B, tons of plastic produced on Earth. And practically all microplastic containing products in personal care are rinsable. That means you're going to flush it down into the waterways, into the sewer. And of course, it's going to make its way into our fields when they spray it with the water, or it's going to find its way into the oceans. And I'm going to show you that about 1/3 of all that plastic will find its way into the waterways and to the oceans. Now, you need to know that microplastic interacts with water, soil microbes, and also plant pollinators. It interacts with everything that is important for our food chain. The widespread presence of micro and nanoplastic and its environmental persistence represent an emerging global threat to our economy and to our lives. Now, you need to know that most of the plastic, even that plastic as being reported to be degradable, is more likely to disintegrate than to degrade. Disintegration of plastic leads to microplastic, microbeads, and nanoplastic. And degradation, decomposition of plastic takes a few years to 1,400 years, depending on the type of plastic, on the type of sunlight it receives, and other factors. And here you see a table of how long certain plastic pieces take to degrade. For example, a very thin film might degrade in 2 to 4 or 5 years. But when it comes to fibers, it takes about 200 years, 300 years. And then you have the beads and these micro and nanoplastic, and they may take up to 1,400 years to degrade. That's many, many generations, and we don't know if we haven't destroyed the world by then. Now, just as an example, take plastic bottles. We use them all. Sometimes there's no other choice, but whenever you can, try not to use plastic bottles, because we know it takes about 450 years for them to degrade. Most likely, they're going to turn first into microplastic, microbeads, and then into nanoplastic before they disintegrate. 450 years to 500 years to degrade a single plastic bottle. And you can imagine how many plastic bottles we use every single day around the globe. It's frightening. So the question is it already too late? Because when you look at it, the average American is ingesting and inhaling around 120,000 plastic pieces a year, it seems. Now, some areas have bigger plastic pollution than others. So there was a study in India, and it showed that in a particular part of India, these individuals living there could consume up to 11 kilograms of microplastic per year. I mean, just imagine that insane amount of plastic that you would just ingest by eating it, by drinking it, or by inhaling it. A study looking at stool samples in Finland, Italy, Japan, the Netherlands, Poland, Russia, the UK, and Austria found microplastic and nanoplastic in every single stool sample tested in these countries around the world. Not one was devoid of plastic. All of them had it in it. So plastic is everywhere. It's in you. It's in me. Now, when you look at animals, starting with the mosquito, the animal that kills most of the humans every single year, according to the World Health Organization, mosquitoes, in average, contain about 40 pieces of microplastic in their very, very tiny stomach. And when they bite you with the saliva, they can transfer some of these plastic pieces to you. Plastic has been found in fish, has been found in frogs, in water fleas, and in fact, about 1/3 of all the fish taken out of the ocean around the British Islands contains microplastic. So it's absolutely has penetrated our food chain. Now, in this study here, the researchers sampled wild-caught fish in Indonesia and in the United States, in California. And they measured if they could see some microplastic debris. And in fact, it was found in 28% of the Indonesian fish sample and in 25% of the Californian fish sample. In general, they found that about 2/3 of all the fish species contained microplastic. In addition to that, about 1/3, 33% of all the shellfish also contained microplastic. Now, the University of Newcastle in Australia studied 50 different studies that were looking on how much plastics do humans ingest per year. And they found that the average person around the world ingests about 5 grams per week. That is the equivalent of 1 credit card. In other words, you're eating about 20 grams of microplastic per month, the equivalent of 4 credit cards, or about 250 grams per year, the equivalent roughly of 50 to 60 credit cards. I mean, all I can say, bon appetit. Now, did you imagine that when you pour yourself a nice cup of tea, that these cheap plastic tea bags, yeah, they're made out of plastic, the cheap ones, and you put them into hot water to get the tea out. Did you know that studies showed that a single plastic bag will release 11.6 billion, with the B, microplastic pieces into the tea that you're just about to drink? In addition to that, 3.1 billion nanoplastic pieces. So you're looking at that, it's almost 15 billion pieces of plastic with one single cup of tea made out of a cheap tea bag that is made out of plastic. I mean, it's absolutely frightening. I mean, you need to rethink what you're doing, right? Now, microplastic is really everywhere. We ingest microplastic via food and beverages. Microplastic has not just been detected in fish and seafood, as I just showed you. It has also been found in beer, in salt, in sugar. And what processed food doesn't use salt or sugar? I mean, that just tells you microplastic is almost everywhere in every processed food, unfortunately. Now, it's really frightening when it comes to babies, right? Here's a study where an Italian research team found 12 microplastic fragments in 4 placentas out of 6 that they looked at. And they only looked at 3% of each of the placentas. So they were able to calculate that each placenta probably contains around 1,000 to 1,200 plastic pieces. That's frightening, because that's microplastic that went from the mother, the pregnant mother, into the placenta. So the big question now is, will it go from the placenta into the baby that is still in the womb? And unfortunately, the answer is yes. And when it does that, microplastic can create a whole bunch of reaction because it's treated like a foreign particle in your body. It doesn't belong there. So you can trigger immune reactions. You can trigger probably even autoimmune diseases. You can certainly trigger inflammation. And the problem is that microplastic acts as a carrier for other toxins. Yeah, other chemicals can dissolve into the plastic and then be carried around your body with the plastic pieces. And you're going to see that microplastic pieces can also change the way proteins work. They can deactivate them. So imagine like one of the proteins would be your hormone insulin that is used to metabolize your sugar or to get the sugar into your cell. And if that is deactivated by microplastic pieces, that, for example, would lead very quickly to diabetes. Now, researchers in general found that plastic pieces from drinking out of water bottles, from wherever it comes from, will really find their way into pregnant women. And in fact, they were found in the lung, in the heart, in the spleen of pregnant women. I mean, these are women that had some medical condition that needed a biopsy for some reason. And then the biopsy was investigated to see if there's plastic in it. And then the same way, they also investigated the babies. And they found in biopsies of babies and in tissues of babies, they found it in the brain, in the heart, in the lung, in the kidney, in the liver, I mean, everywhere, suggesting that maternal lung to fetal tissue, not a particle translocation in the late stage of pregnancy, is a real issue. And the other thing they found, that babies with a lot of microplastic and nanoplastic in them had a 7% delayed growth in the later stages of pregnancy. So this is really frightening because this leads to enormous consequences when you multiply that with all the children born in this world. Now, together with the plastic pieces, they found a bunch of chemicals. And it's just shocking to say that 50 of these chemicals were mystery chemicals. This was a study done by the University of California, San Francisco. And in fact, at the end of the day, they found 109 chemicals in the samples. 55 of those were mystery chemicals, and still 42 of them are still today unknown chemicals. So we are already carriers of completely unknown chemicals. I mean, how frightening is that? So another study looked at our national parks, right? This is the most pristine areas we have to offer here in the United States. We have a bunch of national parks. And they looked at the rainwater, and 98%, that's basically the entire amount of rainwater coming down on all of these parks, contained microplastic. And they calculated that more than 1,000 tons of plastic rains every year into our national parks here in the United States. And that is the equivalent of 123 million plastic bottles raining down from the sky in our national parks alone every single year. So microplastic is too small to be seen by the eye. So it's collecting in dust, and then with the wind, it's blown into the environment, it's blown into the sky. They go everywhere, and then of course they collect into the clouds, and then they come back down with the rain. And this closes kind of circle. And you can now find microplastic pieces in the most remote and most pristine places around the Earth, from the Arctic to the Antarctic to everywhere in between, like the Himalayas. I mean, it's just a pollution that has gone global. Well, I told you a lot about microplastic and nanoplastic in the waterways because, of course, we flush them down after we use them in some personal care product, in toothpaste, in lotions, wherever they're hidden. And then they flush down the toilets, they flush down our drains, and they go into the lakes and waterways. And I told you that about a third of all plastic produced ends up in the waterways. But because a lot of that water is used to spray the fields, for example, or evaporates together with the microplastic pieces and comes back down as rain, we know that we have now contaminated soil, micro and nanoplastic contaminated soil that we use to grow plants. So this is how plastic pieces has found their way, not just into seafood and fish, but also into plants that we eat. And I'm going to show you some shocking results and numbers. So it's estimated that the soil pollution with plastic is about 4 to 24 times higher than the water pollution. So why this big difference? Well, it depends on where you take the samples and how much contaminated water, for example, is used to spray the fields. You have to realize that 80 to 90% of these plastic particles are not removed during water treatment of sewage. And then this sewage sludge, or the water that comes out of the treatment plants, is being used to water our fields. And that's how it finds its way into the soil. And this is a completely underestimated problem. And several foundations around the world are warning us that we have a completely underestimated threat, which is the pollution of land by microplastic. It's absolutely frightening. So here is a study that looked at a variety of tested plants, such as wheat and lettuce, and they found that they all take up microplastic via their roots. The plastic pieces then make it all across the plant, down from the root in the soil, where it's taken in through little cracks in the roots. The plastic goes in, and then it goes through all these channels that are being used to bring all the nutrients into the plant, and they go all the way up to the shoots, and the shoots very often are the pieces of the plant that we harvest and we use for food. And so we know that these plants have microplastic in them, and we eat them. And in fact, here you see some electron microscopic pictures of little plastic pieces, microplastic and nanoplastic, within the plants. These are pieces of wheat where the researchers were able to show that they contain microplastic and nanoplastic and microbeads. So when it comes to our fruit and vegetables, they looked from apples to peaches to nectarines to strawberries and to vegetables like lettuces and carrots. And quite honestly, they found it everywhere. They found microplastic everywhere. The most polluted fruit was the apple. I mean, imagine for an apple to be polluted, the microplastic needs to be taken up from the roots of the apple tree in the soil, make its way up all the way into the tree, into the branches, and make its way into the growing apples. And it's just frightening. So the apple is the most plastic polluted fruit that they found. But they found the microplastic also in a whole bunch of other fruits and vegetables. And the least contaminated one was lettuce, the different type of lettuces, but still, they were contaminated. And we eat this every single day. Now, plastic pieces can accumulate on the outside of the plant, and then they just being harvested when you cut the plant. But we also know that these very small plastic pieces are taken up by the plant. We call this internalized by the plant, and then, of course, make it so into the food chain. That will impact human food sources and hence food security. Our food may not be safe anymore. And there's no way you can wash off the plastic because it's integrated in the fruit and into vegetables. Now, when it comes to human toxicity of microplastic, I already told you that microplastic as an endocrine disruptor, it can change your hormone levels. So microplastic are considered xenoestrogen. Xenoestrogen meaning it's an estrogen that is produced outside of your body, synthetically typically, and you take it on. Whereas real estrogens are those that you produce in your own body. And we both, men and women, produce estrogen. But today we're so overloaded with poisons, with chemicals, with synthetics in the household. I mean, just these sprays that you use. I mean, just think about the laundry washing detergent, your household cleaners, your toothpaste, your shampoos. I mean, just everything, your dryer sheets. I mean, everything is estrogen, and you're taking that into your body in just living in your house. This is why it's so important that you live as clean as you can. It will have a huge impact on your hormone levels. I also told you that these microplastic pieces can change or deactivate proteins, different type of proteins. And everything in our body works through the mechanism of proteins, so that will not work very well. Microplastic and nanoplastic and microbead can also solve all the chemicals into them and transport them like that across the body, or bring them into the body in the first place that way. So they act as a transport vehicle for other chemicals. They can cause inflammation, as I told you already. They can transverse different cellular barriers and membranes. They even cross the highly selective membranes as the blood-brain barrier and find its way into your brain, or find its way into the placenta, as I have shown you with several studies. And that changes also the gene expression. Gene expression means what genes will cause a change in your body and which one not. And you can turn these genes on and off. For example, you have oncogenes that you can turn on, and when you do, then the cell will more likely produce a cancer. Or you can turn them off, and then obviously the cancer hopefully will not be produced. So the microplastic can influence these genes. I mean, we don't want that synthetic stuff influencing our genes and our lives, but this is what happens. And it's interesting that microplastic can also change behavior. They have shown that already with animals in fish studies, but we also know now that we're looking at dementia and Alzheimer and things like that, where we try to see if part of the cause may also be through chemicals such as plastics. It's frightening. Now, something we didn't talk about, microplastic can also serve as a vector for disease. Yes, because I told you already that, for example, mosquitoes have microplastic and they have disease. And it could be that together with the microplastic, when they bite us or the saliva touches us, that they transmit diseases. Now, in addition to that, plastic can also serve as breeding ground for mosquitoes. Why? Because let's say you throw away a plastic cup, a plastic bottle that is half disintegrated, or even a plastic bag, and water accumulates on the plastic and serves as a perfect breeding ground for mosquitoes, which then going to transmit the disease to you. We also know from the different studies that microplastic is a vector for bacterial disease. Now, we know that some of the plastic pieces, for example, in the ocean, are a good surface for bacteria to adhere to and to be transported around the oceans. And then when fish eat these plastic particles, they also eat the bacteria and get the disease. We also know that in human disease, microplastic has its role in the transmission of the sexually transmitted disease, chlamydia. So if you touch some plastic surfaces that contain that pathogen, and you touch, for example, your eyes, it has been shown that you could transmit the disease through the plastic into your eye and get the sexually transmitted disease. So I can say that plastic, microplastic, microbeads, and nanoplastic is probably one of the most widespread and long-lasting man-made disaster on planet Earth. And if we continue like this, by the year of 2050, that's 30 years from now, we might have more plastic in the oceans than fish. I mean, just think about that. I mean, we need to stop this nonsense. I mean, please do your best to limit the use of plastic wherever you can. Try to at least recycle it. We know that 60-70% of plastic is not even being recycled. It's a single use and thrown away and just made its way, as I told you, in all these different parts of the world. So please do your thing. Try to limit your plastic buying if you can, and try to limit your plastic use at home. And if you use it, then try to at least have it recycled. So hopefully then the industry can reuse it and it's not going into our food chain and the waterways and on planet Earth. And so it's just terrible to say, but we went from the Stone Age to the Iron Age into the Plastic Age. I mean, from building buildings and houses with stones and rocks, like in the Flintstone Age, right? Now we're building houses in third world countries with plastic bottles. I mean, just imagine that. If you use recycled plastic and you create building materials out of that, that's maybe a good use. But still, it will bleach off your building. The rain will wash off some of that microplastic. It will find its way in the soil. So I don't know. I think we just should produce less plastic. That's what we need to do. We need to go from the plastic age into a revival age, where a recycle age, something where we just do a chemical-free living. So we need to go from the plastic age into a chemical-free living age. It's so important. It's important for you, for me, for your pets, for your children, for your generations to come. 3, 4, 5 generations down, they're still going to suffer from the plastic you're using today. Just think about that. Children will not be able in 20, 30, 40 years to reproduce anymore and get their own children, because the hormone levels have changed so much. So plastic, microplastic, microbeads, nanoplastic is a real issue, and you need to take this seriously. And so I have written a book called A Doctor's Guide to Essential Rewards, 12 Months to Clean Living. So get this book, because in this book, I describe issues with microplastic in your, coming from toothpaste, for example, or from lotions. But I go through a whole bunch of other things that we use, plastics, chemicals, just all these poisons that we use that are changing our lives, our children's lives, our pet lives, and unfortunately our future generations' lives. So I will show you in this book how you can clean up your life in 12 months. What are the low-hanging fruits? Where can you get these products? How do you order them? I even have a monthly order sheet. I write the name of the article, the type of article, the number of the article, and the price of the article. And I even write how much money you can save if you regularly order these type of products. So please get this book, A Doctor's Guide, 12 Months to Clean Living. You can order it very easily at Amazon.com or at my personal webpage, droli.com/store. So go there, get the book, read it, give it to your friends. I even have a little mini edition, so you can just hand it out if this is also so important to you as it is important to me. So go save your life, change your life, save your children, save your pets, and save your future generations. Thank you for listening. This is Dr. Ollie, and I see you soon again.